Apache woman who escaped the forced labor camp, collapsed at Cowboy's cabin door. Within that camp lived Natsei, a young Apache woman whose life had changed in ways she never imagined. Before she had been taken, her days were filled with the quiet rhythm of her tribe's life, gathering food, helping her family, and listening to the elders' stories by the fire. She had laughed under the stars, danced with her friends, and felt the wind on her face as she ran across the open land. But now her laughter was gone, replaced by a heavy fear that followed her everywhere. The camp was surrounded by tall fences made of rough-hewn logs, reinforced with sharp wire that gleamed in the sunlight. Guards moved along the edges, their boots crunching against the earth, keeping careful watch over every prisoner. Natsei had learned to keep her head down, to make herself small and quiet, but even that was never enough to escape notice for long. The labor was brutal. From dawn until dusk, she and the other prisoners were forced to work in the fields, breaking soil and carrying heavy loads under the scorching sun. Their hands were raw and bleeding from the endless work, and many fell ill from exhaustion and poor food. Natsei's heart ached every day she thought of her family, who had been taken far from her in earlier raids. Her mother's gentle hands, her father's strong voice, the way her little siblings laughed, these memories were both her greatest comfort and her deepest sorrow. She whispered their names under her breath during work, small prayers that they might be safe, that one day she might see them again. These thoughts gave her strength, even when her body felt as if it would give out. Though the camp was full of despair, Natsei was careful to notice everything around her. She watched the guards, noting their patterns and habits. She noticed which corners were poorly lit at night, which paths were left unguarded, and the moments when the men became careless. Every day she quietly studied, as if each small detail were a key to her freedom. Her mind, sharp and focused, became her most important tool. The work was harsh, but her hope was fiercer. It burned quietly inside her, a steady flame she refused to let die. Life in the camp was not just about work, it was also about survival. The prisoners had to look out for each other. Some formed quiet friendships, sharing scraps of food or helping each other carry heavy loads. Others kept to themselves, afraid that speaking out would bring punishment. Natsei had learned whom to trust and whom to avoid. Her instincts, guided by experience and intuition, helped her navigate the camp's dangers. She had seen many prisoners punished harshly for small mistakes, and she knew that even a single misstep could cost her dearly. The nights in the camp were even harder than the days. The cold crept into the thin, worn blankets, and the wind whispered against the walls of the shelters. Natsei lay awake often, listening to the guards' boots echoing in the darkness, counting the hours until the first light of dawn. She dreamed of running free across the open plains, her hair flowing behind her, the wind on her face. In her dreams, she could feel the earth beneath her feet and hear the laughter of her family. These dreams were fleeting but precious, and when she woke, she clung to them as a secret treasure that no one could take away. Food was scarce and meager. The prisoners ate only what was provided, small portions of tough bread, watery stew, and sometimes a few roots or dried meat. Hunger gnawed at her constantly, making her muscles weak and her mind foggy. Still, she learned to ration what little she had, to save her strength for the work and the careful planning of her escape. Every day, she imagined the moment she would step beyond the fences, breathing freely under the open sky. It was a thought so powerful that it lifted her spirits even when her body begged for rest. The guards were cruel, but not all of them. Some were rough but indifferent, while a few seemed almost bored with the prisoners. Natsei noticed the differences carefully. She learned to use the moments of inattention to gather small supplies, hide pieces of bread, or find quiet corners where she could rest her aching body. Every small success gave her courage. Each day, she added another detail to her plan, thinking about how she could move quietly, avoid the patrols, and finally reach freedom. Despite the fear and hardship, Natsei's spirit was unbroken. She found small ways to keep hope alive, singing softly when no one was listening, tracing patterns in the dirt with her fingers, and remembering the stories of her ancestors. She reminded herself that her people had survived much worse, and if they could endure, so could she. These thoughts strengthened her heart, giving her the resolve to keep moving forward, no matter how heavy the burden. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of red and gold, Natsei paused for a moment. She watched the shadows grow long across the camp, noting the guards' positions as they changed shift. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the last sunlight on her face. This quiet moment, brief and ordinary to anyone else, filled her with determination. She whispered to herself that the time would come soon when she would leave the camp behind, never to return. In the weeks that followed, Natsei continued to study, observe, and survive. She moved carefully, always alert, and began to test the edges of the camp when no one was watching. She listened to the guards' conversations, learning when they would be tired or distracted. Every detail mattered. Every small action she took was a step toward freedom. Slowly, piece by piece, she built a plan that she knew might be dangerous, but she had no other choice. Her desire to be free was stronger than her fear. Even in the darkest moments, she held on to the hope that she would see her family again. She imagined the reunion, the tears, the laughter, and the stories they would share. These thoughts became her shield against despair, a light in the shadow of captivity. The camp had taken her freedom, her comfort, and her safety, but it had not yet taken her courage. Natsei promised herself that she would fight, that she would escape, and that she would survive. As another long day ended and the camp settled into the quiet of night, Natsei lay down with her eyes open, staring at the sky. The stars shone brightly above, distant and untouchable, yet they reminded her that the world outside was vast and waiting. One day she would reach it. One day she would run freely across the land she loved. For now she waited, watched, and planned. The flame of hope burned brightly within her, a silent promise that she would never give up. In the midst of hardship and despair, Natsei had learned an important truth. Freedom begins in the mind. Even when her body was weak, her spirit remained strong. Even when the days were long and cruel, her heart held a vision of a life beyond the fences. And it was this vision, this hope, that would carry her forward when the moment of escape finally arrived. The night was dark and quiet, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow the land whole. Natsei lay awake on her thin, worn blanket, listening to the distant sounds of the camp. The guards' footsteps echoed occasionally, a sharp reminder that freedom was not yet hers. She had waited for this moment for weeks, carefully observing, planning, and gathering every small piece of knowledge that might save her life. Tonight, she knew, could be the night she tried to escape. She rose slowly, every muscle aching from the long day of labor, every step careful not to make a sound. The air was cool and smelled faintly of dry earth and sage. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from hope, the kind of hope that had been buried deep inside her for so long. She moved toward the edge of the camp, staying low, using the shadows as her ally. Each step felt heavy, but she forced herself forward, reminding herself that this was the first step toward freedom. The fence loomed ahead, tall and imposing, with its sharp wire glinting faintly in the moonlight. Natsei had studied it for weeks. She knew the sections where the guards' attention was weakest, where the wire had gaps, where the ground was soft enough to slip through carefully. Her hands were steady as she tested the gaps, her mind sharp and focused despite her exhaustion. She moved like a shadow, quiet and deliberate, making sure that no sound betrayed her presence. As she climbed over the fence, her pulse raced. Her feet hit the ground softly and she froze, listening. There was nothing but the night, still and calm, relief mixed with fear. The open land beyond the fence stretched out before her, dark and uncertain. She knew the journey would not be easy. The wilderness was vast and dangers waited at every turn. But she felt a thrill in her chest. This was the first taste of freedom she had felt in months, maybe years. Natsei did not run immediately. She moved slowly at first, testing her strength, making sure she was not being followed. The camp grew smaller behind her, its fences and watchtowers shrinking into the darkness. She kept her head low, her eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of danger. She remembered the advice her father had given her long ago. The land is your friend, but it can also hide threats. Watch, listen, and move wisely. She breathed deeply, feeling the cool night air fill her lungs, and remembered that she was not alone. Her ancestors' courage and wisdom were with her. The terrain ahead was rough. Hills rose and fell like waves in the dark, and the ground was littered with rocks and brush. Natsei moved carefully, using her hands to steady herself when she stumbled. Her feet were sore, her muscles screamed, but she pushed on. Hunger gnawed at her, but she ignored it, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. Every step was a victory, a small claim of freedom in a world that had tried to take everything from her. As she moved deeper into the wilderness, she thought about the days in the camp, the cruelty of the guards, the harsh work, the hunger, and the fear. Her mind replayed every memory, but instead of despair, she used them as fuel. Each memory strengthened her resolve. She knew that freedom was not guaranteed, that she might be caught, that she might fall ill or become lost. But she also knew that staying in the camp meant certain suffering. The choice was clear, and her heart would not let her turn back. The night grew colder, and Natsei wrapped her thin shawl tightly around her shoulders. She moved slowly, pausing often to listen. Every sound of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an animal, the wind in the trees, was magnified in the darkness. She stayed alert, remembering that predators, both human and animal, could be anywhere. She whispered a quiet prayer, asking for guidance and protection. Her words were soft, almost swallowed by the night, but they brought her a strange comfort. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time seemed to stretch in the darkness. Natsei's eyes grew tired, but she forced herself to keep moving. She rested briefly behind a large boulder, drinking from a small skin of water she had managed to carry. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear but from fatigue. Her body screamed for rest, but she reminded herself that safety was still far away. She needed to keep moving until she could find shelter, until the first light of dawn could guide her further. She used the stars to navigate just as her people had taught her. The constellations were familiar, and she felt a strange comfort in their presence. They seemed to guide her, pointing the way toward freedom. The land, though dark and unfamiliar, was alive with the sounds and smells of nature. She noticed small things: a fox passing quietly in the distance, the call of a night bird, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Each small observation reminded her that she was part of the world, not trapped by it. Hunger and exhaustion grew stronger as the night wore on. Her stomach ached, and her legs felt like lead. Yet she pressed forward, driven by the thought of her family, of the life she wanted to reclaim. Memories of her mother's gentle voice and her father's strong hands gave her courage. She imagined the day she would see them again, and that vision lit a fire within her that no exhaustion could put out. Every step was a promise she made to herself. She would survive, she would be free, she would see her people again. As dawn approached, the world slowly changed. The sky turned from black to deep blue, then to soft shades of pink and gold. Natsei paused on a ridge, looking out over the land below. She could see the edges of the forest and the winding paths of a distant river. Her heart lifted. She knew that she had passed the most dangerous part of her journey, the part closest to the camp. The day would bring new challenges, but the first taste of freedom filled her with hope and energy. She pressed on, moving carefully through the morning mist. The forest grew thicker, the trees rising like guardians around her. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating patches of warmth that brushed her face. Birds called to one another, and the wind carried the scent of flowers and earth. Natsei felt a strange joy at being alive, at being able to move without fear of immediate capture. Every sound, every breath of air, every step forward was a triumph. Despite the beauty around her, she knew she could not relax completely. The guards could be searching for her, and she needed to find a safe place to rest and hide. She moved toward a small clearing near a stream, where the water was clean and fresh. She knelt by the stream, drinking deeply, feeling the cool water revive her tired body. She washed her face and hands, feeling a sense of renewal. Even in the wilderness, she knew she had to care for herself if she wanted to survive. In the clearing, she allowed herself a moment to rest. She sat against a tree, closing her eyes briefly, and felt the warmth of the sun on her skin. Her body ached, her feet were blistered, and her stomach grumbled, but her spirit was stronger than ever. She had escaped the camp, crossed dangerous land, and survived the first night. She knew that more challenges awaited her, but she felt a growing confidence in her own strength. As she prepared to move again, Natsei thought about the path ahead. She would need to find shelter, avoid people who might report her, and continue to rely on her knowledge of the land. But for the first time in a long while, she felt hope, real, powerful hope. She remembered the stories of her ancestors who had survived hardships far worse than this, and she felt their courage flowing through her veins. She whispered a quiet promise to them. She would honor their strength, and she would survive. The journey was far from over, but Natsei had taken the first step into a new life. The night had tested her, but she had endured. The dawn had greeted her, and the world seemed full of possibilities. With each careful step, she moved closer to safety, closer to her family, closer to the life she longed for. And though the path was uncertain, one thing was clear. She would not give up, she would not falter, and she would not allow fear to control her. Freedom was hers to claim, and she would fight for it with every ounce of her being. The sun climbed higher in the sky, spilling golden light across the rolling hills and dense forest. Natsei moved slowly but steadily, her body sore from the long night of travel. Each step was cautious, her eyes constantly scanning the surrounding trees and brush. She knew the camp guards might be searching for her, and she could not afford to be careless. The wilderness was her ally, but it was also unpredictable. Branches snapped underfoot, and shadows shifted with the sunlight, reminding her to remain alert at all times. She followed a narrow path that led to a small creek, its clear water flowing gently over smooth stones. The sound of the stream was calming, almost like a soft whisper, and she knelt to drink, cupping her hands to the cool water. Her reflection stared back at her, a young woman, tired and worn, but with eyes that burned with determination. She had escaped the camp, survived the long night, and moved closer to freedom than she had ever been before. And yet she knew the journey was far from over. Hunger pressed against her, sharp and unrelenting. She had only a few scraps of bread left, and the sun was high, promising a long, hot day ahead. Natsei's mind turned to the survival skills her mother had taught her as a child. She looked for edible plants along the creek, small berries, and tender leaves she could eat without harm. Each small bite was nourishment for her body and hope for her spirit. She reminded herself that careful planning and patience could keep her alive. Hours passed, and the forest grew thicker. Trees rose like silent guardians, their branches forming a green canopy overhead. Sunlight dappled the forest floor, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. Natsei moved quietly, stepping over fallen logs and around low-hanging branches, careful not to make unnecessary noise. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent a shiver down her spine. She was alone, far from help, and the smallest mistake could put her at risk. Yet she pressed on, each step bringing her closer to safety, to warmth, and to shelter. As she walked, her thoughts drifted to her family. She imagined their faces, their laughter, and the moments they had shared before the camp took her away. These memories were bittersweet, painful because of the separation, but comforting because they reminded her of the life she was fighting to reclaim. She whispered their names softly under her breath, like a secret prayer, and each whisper strengthened her resolve. She would see them again, she would survive, she would not give up. By mid-afternoon, her legs ached and her stomach growled with hunger. She needed to rest, even briefly, to regain strength for the journey ahead. Spotting a small clearing surrounded by thick bushes, she crouched down behind a cluster of rocks. The shade offered a moment of relief from the hot sun, and she took a few minutes to breathe deeply and listen to the forest around her. Birds sang softly in the trees, and the gentle rush of the creek nearby reminded her that life continued even in the wilderness. Natsei knew she could not linger for long. She needed shelter, a safe place to rest where no one would find her. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for signs of life or human presence. Far in the distance, she noticed a small cabin, its roof barely visible above the trees. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign that someone lived there. Her heart beat faster. This could be her chance to find safety, warmth, and help. But it could also be dangerous. She did not know who lived there or whether they could be trusted. Cautiously, she approached the cabin, staying low and moving quietly through the underbrush. Each step was deliberate, careful not to make a sound. The closer she got, the more details she noticed. The cabin's wooden walls were weathered but sturdy, and the small porch showed signs of daily use. Someone had lived here for some time, someone who cared for the place. Her instincts told her to be careful, but her exhaustion made it difficult to wait. She needed shelter more than caution. When she reached the edge of the clearing, she paused, listening. The cabin was quiet, except for the faint sound of someone moving inside. She could hear the soft scrape of a chair against the floor and the gentle hum of a tune. Natsei's heart raced. She knew she needed help, but she also knew that she must be careful in approaching the stranger. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, and then stepped forward, her feet crunching softly on the fallen leaves. As she reached the cabin door, her body gave way to exhaustion. Her legs could not carry her any further, and she collapsed at the threshold, gasping for breath. Her hands scraped against the wooden floor and her face pressed against the cool boards. She felt utterly spent, her strength almost gone. For a moment she could not move, could not think, only lay there listening to the sound of her own heartbeat. Inside the cabin, the man who lived there, a rugged cowboy named Samuel Carter, heard the faint thud at the door. He approached cautiously, hand hovering near the handle of the small knife he kept at his belt. Peering outside, he saw a young woman lying there, exhausted and trembling. At first he thought she might be lost or hurt or even a threat, but her weak and desperate state quickly became clear. She was no danger, she was someone in need. Samuel opened the door carefully, kneeling down beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked in a calm voice, not wanting to startle her. Natsei lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. There was a mix of fear, exhaustion, and something else, hope. She could not speak, her throat too dry and her body too weak. But her eyes told her story. She had fled from danger and needed help. Samuel nodded quietly, understanding without needing words. He gently helped her inside the cabin, guiding her to a small chair by the fire. The warmth was immediate and comforting, and Natsei shivered as the heat touched her cold skin. Samuel fetched a bowl of water and a piece of bread, offering them to her. She took them slowly, too weak to eat quickly, but each bite and sip restored a bit of her strength. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe, if only for a moment. As she rested, Samuel observed her carefully. She was young, perhaps only a few years older than his own niece, and there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself even in exhaustion. Her clothes were torn, her hands scraped and dirty, and yet her eyes shone with intelligence and determination. He sensed that she had endured hardships far greater than he could imagine, and he felt a strong desire to help her. Natsei, in turn, observed Samuel. He was a tall man, strong and weathered from years of hard work in the wilderness. His eyes were kind but careful, as if he had learned to judge people quickly and accurately. She sensed that he could be trusted, though she remained cautious. Trust had been a dangerous thing in the camp, and she had learned to give it only when necessary. But something about this man felt different. He did not look at her with suspicion or cruelty. He looked at her with understanding. Hours passed, and Natsei gradually regained some of her strength. She sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket Samuel had provided, and told him a few words in her own language. Though he did not understand, he could see her determination and her exhaustion. He nodded, offering her silence and patience, two things she had learned to appreciate more than anything else. In that quiet moment, a fragile trust began to grow between them, a connection born out of necessity but strengthened by shared humanity. By evening, Natsei felt strong enough to speak a little more. She gestured toward the forest, trying to indicate her journey and her escape. Samuel listened carefully, piecing together her story from gestures, expressions, and a few words. He realized that she had fled from a dangerous camp, that she had traveled alone through the wilderness, and that she had survived against incredible odds. His respect for her courage grew with every detail he understood. As night fell, Natsei rested near the fire, feeling the warmth seep into her tired muscles. She knew she could not stay forever. She needed to continue her journey to find her family and safety. But for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. The cabin, the fire, and Samuel's quiet kindness gave her a glimpse of what life could be beyond fear and suffering. She allowed herself a few moments of relief, letting her mind rest and her spirit recover. The stars shone brightly through the small cabin window, and Natsei looked up at them, remembering the nights she had spent under the open sky, dreaming of freedom. Now she had reached a temporary haven, a place where she could gather strength before continuing her journey. And though she did not yet know what lay ahead, she felt ready to face it. The world outside was still dangerous, but she had survived the first part of her journey, and that was proof that she could survive whatever came next. The morning sun streamed through the small cabin window, painting the wooden walls with warm, golden light. Natsei stirred slowly, blinking against the brightness, her body finally feeling stronger after the night of rest. For the first time in days, she felt the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat instead of the chaos and fear that had followed her for so long. Her muscles, though sore, were no longer screaming in protest. Her stomach, still weak, was beginning to feel normal again after the simple meal Samuel had given her. She sat up carefully, taking in the small cabin, the firewood stacked neatly, and the quiet, calm atmosphere. Samuel moved about the cabin, tending to small chores, feeding the few animals he kept nearby, and keeping the space warm. Natsei watched him from her chair, her eyes tracking each movement. He was methodical, deliberate, and calm, a stark contrast to the chaotic, fearful life she had left behind. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply observe, letting the comfort of normal human activity ease the tension in her mind. It was strange to see a life that seemed ordinary, yet for her it felt extraordinary. After a short while, Samuel noticed her watching and spoke gently. "You should eat something," he said, placing a small plate of bread, dried fruit, and some fresh milk in front of her. His voice was kind but not patronizing, and Natsei felt a small spark of trust growing. She picked at the food slowly, savoring each bite, allowing the simple nourishment to strengthen her weakened body. With each mouthful, she felt more connected to the world outside the camp, more ready to face the journey that still lay ahead. As she ate, she began to speak, slowly at first, then with more confidence. She shared fragments of her story, her life before the camp, the capture, and the long, harsh days she had endured. Samuel listened quietly, giving her space to speak, asking questions only when it was clear she wanted to answer. He did not rush her, did not interrupt her grief or her pride. He simply offered his presence, and that was enough. For the first time in a long while, Natsei felt that someone truly understood the weight of her experience. She told him about the work in the camp, the endless labor under the sun, the hunger, and the harsh punishments. She spoke of the guards, some cruel, some indifferent, and of the quiet friendships she had managed to form despite the fear. Every word was heavy with emotion, but she did not falter. Her voice carried both sorrow and resilience, a testament to the strength she had cultivated over months of hardship. Samuel felt a deep respect for her courage, realizing that this young woman had survived situations that would have broken many. After a pause, Natsei began to speak of her dreams, dreams of freedom, of returning to her family, and of life beyond the fences that had once confined her. She described the long night of escape, the dark forest, the creek, and the sun rising over the hills. Each detail she shared seemed to bring a spark of life into the cabin, filling the space with the story of her survival. Samuel could see the fire in her eyes, a determination that had not been dimmed by suffering. It was a fire that demanded respect, a fire that inspired hope. As the day went on, Samuel shared his own stories. He spoke of life in the wilderness, the solitude of the cabin, and the hardships of his work. Though their experiences were different, they found a shared understanding of endurance, patience, and respect for the land. Natsei listened, intrigued by the different perspective he offered, and Samuel listened with quiet admiration for the strength and courage she displayed. In that small cabin, a fragile bridge formed between two very different worlds, built on empathy and human connection. Natsei began to regain her confidence, realizing that she could rest and recover here without fear. The cabin became more than a temporary refuge. It became a place where she could rebuild her strength, both physically and emotionally. She helped Samuel with small chores, gathering firewood and tending to the animals, slowly regaining the sense of normalcy that had been absent from her life for so long. With each task, she felt a growing sense of independence, a reminder that she was capable and resilient. Over the next few days, the bond between Natsei and Samuel grew stronger. They communicated in gestures, shared smiles, and occasional words, even though the language barrier remained a challenge. Samuel brought her food, water, and warm blankets, but he also offered quiet encouragement, allowing her to regain not only her strength but her sense of self-worth. Natsei, in turn, began to trust him more fully, understanding that this man did not see her as weak or lesser, but as a fellow human being deserving of care and respect. During one quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Natsei sat by the fire, reflecting on her journey. She thought of the camp, the guards, and the long, painful days she had endured. She thought of the fear that had once gripped her heart and the courage that had allowed her to flee. She realized that she had survived not only because of her strength, but because of her hope, her careful planning, and her unwavering belief that freedom was worth any risk. Samuel sat nearby, quietly watching the fire. He noticed the way Natsei's expression softened, the way her eyes seemed to hold both sorrow and determination. He realized that she carried a story that was not only about suffering, but also about resilience, hope, and the power of the human spirit. Though he could not understand every word she spoke, he understood the essence of her experience. A journey of survival against overwhelming odds, a journey that had brought her to his doorstep. As the days turned into a week, Natsei grew stronger. Her muscles regained some of their lost strength. Her skin regained its color, and her mind began to feel clear again. She spent time exploring the area around the cabin, learning which plants were safe to eat, where the water ran cleanest, and how to move quietly through the forest. Each discovery was a small victory, a reminder that she was capable and resourceful. Samuel watched with quiet pride, recognizing the same determination and intelligence that had carried her through the camp and the night of escape. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Natsei finally shared her ultimate goal: to find her family, to return to her tribe, and to reclaim the life that had been taken from her. Samuel listened intently, understanding the importance of her mission. He offered what help he could: advice on the terrain, a map of nearby areas, and supplies to continue her journey. Though he knew the path ahead would be difficult, he also knew that she had the courage and skill to succeed. Together in that quiet cabin, they prepared for the next stage of her journey. Natsei felt a sense of gratitude unlike anything she had experienced before. She had survived the camp, the night in the forest, and the exhaustion that had threatened to overwhelm her. Now she had found a place of safety, a moment of peace, and a human connection that reminded her of what life could be outside of fear and suffering. She realized that recovery was not just physical, it was emotional, mental, and spiritual. The kindness of one person had given her the strength to face the challenges that lay ahead. As night fell, Natsei looked out the small cabin window at the stars above. She thought of her family, the land she had grown up on, and the freedom that awaited her. She whispered a quiet promise to herself. She would continue her journey, she would find her family, and she would honor the strength and resilience that had carried her this far. The fire crackled softly beside her, and for the first time in a long while she felt a deep sense of peace. The cabin had become more than a refuge, it was a place of renewal. It was where Natsei had regained her strength, shared her story, and prepared herself for the journey ahead. Samuel's quiet presence and willingness to help without judgment had shown her that not all people sought to control or harm her. She had learned that trust, when given carefully, could be a powerful force, capable of healing and strengthening even the most battered spirit. By the time the sun rose on a new day, Natsei was ready to continue. Her body was stronger, her mind clearer, and her spirit renewed. She packed her few belongings, said a quiet goodbye to Samuel, and stepped outside into the bright morning light. The world beyond the cabin was vast and full of unknown challenges, but she felt ready to face them. She had survived the camp, the night of escape, and the days in the wilderness. Now she would continue her journey toward freedom, family, and the life she deserved. The morning air was crisp and cool, carrying the fresh scent of pine and earth. Natsei stood at the edge of the small clearing, taking a deep breath as she looked back at the cabin one last time. Samuel had risen early, tending to the fire and preparing a small bundle of supplies for her journey: a few pieces of bread, dried meat, and a small skin of water. He had also given her advice, pointing out safe paths, quiet streams, and places where she could rest without being noticed. Natsei felt a mixture of gratitude and determination. The cabin had been a place of recovery, a shelter in the storm of her life, but she knew she could not stay. Freedom awaited beyond the trees, and her family, somewhere far away, needed her. She adjusted the shawl around her shoulders, tightened the straps of her worn pack, and stepped forward. Every step carried the weight of months of suffering, but also the hope and courage that had grown stronger with each trial she had faced. The forest seemed different in the morning light. Shadows receded, and the sounds of birds and rustling leaves created a lively symphony. Natsei moved carefully, her senses alert to every sound and movement. She avoided open spaces, moving along paths hidden by trees and bushes. She drank from the streams Samuel had pointed out, washed her hands and face, and allowed herself a moment to enjoy the coolness of the water. Each small action reminded her that she was alive, capable, and in control of her own fate. As the hours passed, the terrain became more challenging. Hills rose steeply, rocks jutted from the earth, and the underbrush grew thicker. Natsei climbed carefully, planting her feet firmly to avoid slipping. Her muscles ached, but she welcomed the challenge, knowing that each step brought her closer to safety. She paused occasionally to rest, leaning against a tree, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, and remembering the fire that had always burned inside her. The fire that had carried her through the camp, through the night, and through the cabin. During her journey, she kept her mind focused on her family. She imagined her mother's gentle voice, her father's strong hands, and the laughter of her siblings. These thoughts were both comforting and motivating. They reminded her of what she was fighting for, of the life she longed to reclaim. Every step became more than a movement across the land. It became a step toward reunion, toward love, and toward the life that had been stolen from her. As she moved through a dense section of forest, Natsei noticed signs of human activity. Footprints in the soft soil, faint smoke rising in the distance, and the occasional sound of animals fleeing suggested that people were nearby. She knew she needed to remain cautious. Trust had been a dangerous thing in her past, and she could not afford to be careless now. She stayed low, moving quietly, observing her surroundings with careful eyes. The forest could hide both dangers and opportunities, and she had learned to read its signs. Midday approached, and Natsei found a small clearing with soft grass and a few scattered bushes. She rested there briefly, drinking from her water skin and eating a small piece of bread. Her body was tired, but her spirit remained strong. She reminded herself that every mile traveled, every challenge overcome, was proof of her courage and resilience. The wilderness, once a place of uncertainty and fear, had become a landscape of survival and empowerment. She was no longer simply fleeing, she was moving with purpose. As she traveled further, she encountered a small stream cutting through the forest. The water was clear and cold, and she knelt to drink and refresh herself. She noticed the reflections in the water, trees, sky, and her own determined face staring back. For a moment, she allowed herself to smile. She had come so far, survived so much, and now the final stage of her journey was within reach. The memory of Samuel's kindness and the comfort of the cabin filled her with strength. She felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. By late afternoon, the forest began to thin, and Natsei emerged into rolling hills dotted with wildflowers and tall grass. The open land was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. She had to stay alert, knowing that the world beyond the forest was less forgiving. She moved carefully, using the grass for cover, and avoided the obvious trails where travelers or settlers might pass. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth, and she felt a strange joy in the simple beauty surrounding her. Freedom, she realized, was not only a place but also a feeling, the ability to move, to breathe, and to hope. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Natsei spotted smoke rising in the distance. She paused, heart pounding. Was it a settlement, a camp, or simply a distant fire? She could not risk being discovered by strangers who might not understand her story. Moving quietly, she decided to follow a narrow path that skirted the smoke, hoping it would lead her to safety without attracting attention. Her senses were sharp, her movements careful, every decision deliberate. She had learned the importance of patience and observation through every trial she had faced. Night approached, and Natsei found a secluded spot behind a cluster of rocks and low bushes. She settled down, unrolled a small blanket, and rested. The stars emerged above, shining brightly in the clear sky. She looked up at them, remembering the nights spent under similar skies, fleeing the camp, and finding her way through the wilderness. Each star seemed to shine as a symbol of hope, of guidance, and of the courage that had carried her this far. She whispered a quiet prayer of thanks for her strength and resilience, for the kindness of those who had helped her, and for the hope that still guided her. The next morning, she rose before dawn, determined to cover as much distance as possible. She moved quickly but carefully, following the directions Samuel had given her and her own understanding of the land. Every hill climbed, every stream crossed, and every obstacle overcome was a testament to her strength. Her body was tired, but her spirit was unbreakable. She reminded herself that the end of the journey was near, that she would soon see her family and reclaim the life she had been denied. By midday, she reached a wide, flowing river. Its water sparkled in the sunlight, and she paused to rest and drink. The river was both a challenge and an opportunity. She had to cross it carefully, but it could also guide her toward the settlements and trails that might lead her home. She observed the water, noting the shallow areas, the rocks that could be used for stepping, and the safest path across. With careful steps and steady balance, she crossed the river, her heart pounding with both exertion and excitement. As the day continued, the landscape changed from hills and forests to open fields and scattered trees. She moved quickly, knowing that the sun would soon set and darkness could make travel more dangerous. Her body was weary, but her determination remained strong. She imagined the moment she would see her family again, the warmth of their embrace, the tears, the laughter, and the stories they would share. That vision carried her forward, giving her strength beyond what her body alone could provide. Late in the afternoon, she saw a familiar landmark, one her mother had described long ago, a large rock formation near the edge of the plains. Recognition filled her heart with joy. She knew she was getting close to her people, close to safety, and close to the life she had dreamed of reclaiming. Her steps grew lighter, her pace quickened, and she felt the power of hope propelling her forward. Every hardship she had faced, the camp, the night of escape, the wilderness, and even the days of recovery, had led her to this moment. As dusk fell, she finally glimpsed smoke rising in the distance, just like the stories she had remembered from her childhood. Her heart raced with anticipation and relief. She moved carefully but quickly, following the smoke toward the small cluster of dwellings she had once known. Each step brought her closer to her family, closer to warmth, and closer to the life that had been taken from her. The stars above seemed to guide her, shining brightly as she approached the final stage of her journey. Finally, as night settled over the land, Natsei reached the edge of the village. She paused for a moment, taking in the familiar sights, the small huts, the open spaces, the quiet presence of the people she had once known. Her heart pounded with emotion. She stepped forward cautiously, calling out softly. The sound of her voice carried across the night, and in the distance, she saw figures moving toward her. Faces she had longed to see, voices she had dreamed of hearing, and the warmth of family embraced her immediately. Tears filled her eyes as she ran into their arms. Her mother held her tightly, her father brushed tears from his cheeks, and her siblings clung to her in joy and relief. All the suffering, all the hardship, all the danger of her journey melted away in that single moment of reunion. Natsei had survived against impossible odds, and now she was home, surrounded by the love that had fueled her every step. In the quiet that followed, she looked back at the path she had traveled, the forests, the hills, the rivers, and the cabin where Samuel had helped her recover. Each challenge, each moment of fear and hope had led her to this place. She realized that freedom, courage, and resilience were not just about escaping danger. They were about trusting in herself, in the world, and in the kindness of others. Natsei had reclaimed her life. She had faced every obstacle with determination, survived against the odds, and returned to her family stronger and wiser than she had ever been. Her journey was a testament to the power of hope, courage, and human resilience, a story that would be remembered for generations, a story of survival, trust, and the triumph of the human spirit.